Él es el director ejecutivo de la Social Progress Imperative, es economista de profesión y coautor de Filántropo Capitalismo, cómo los ricos pueden salvar al mundo y el camino desde la ruina, un nuevo capitalismo para una sociedad grande. Previamente Michael fue un oficial senior en el Departamento para el Desarrollo Internacional del Gobierno del Reino Unido, donde manejó los programas británicos de ayuda extranjera a Rusia y Ucrania y dirigió el Departamento de Comunicaciones. Fue profesor de Economía de la Universidad de Varsovia, Polonia, y a comienzos de la década de 1990. Sus TED Talks han sido vistas más de 2 millones de veces. Y su talk del 2014 fue escogida por TED como una de las ideas más poderosas del 2014 y por The Telegraph como una de las 10 mejores de todos los tiempos. En 2016 fue nombrado uno de los 100 hombres mejores conectados en Gran Bretaña por la revista GQ y uno de los top 50 en poder e influencia por Non-Fit Times. Así que creo que es suficiente presentación para decir que que va a ser la presentación del Índice de Progreso Social, los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y el desafío de transitar del análisis a la acción, va a estar más que provechosa de escuchar. Así que, señor Michael Green, adelante.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And it's great to be here with you today, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here among friends. I count Paraguay as the best friend that the Social Progress Imperative has had. Paraguay very quickly in 2013 became one of the first adopters and supporters of Social Progress Index. Paraguay has blazed a trail in using Social Progress Index to guide national economic strategy. And today I'm here, so glad to be here amongst friends, celebrating the next leap forward in the application of Social Progress Index in Paraguay down to the level of the departments. And so my congratulations to you, Mr. Molina, your team, and everyone here in the Social Progress Network for the incredible work that you've been doing. My job is to set the stage for some of the discussion later about what is the Social Progress Index, what's it trying to achieve. The Social Progress Index was very much born from crisis. It was born from the crisis of the financial sector in 2008. It was born from the crisis that was the Arab Spring of 2010. It was born from the crisis of the growing realization that our world is running up against its environmental limits. It was born from the growing concerns, the crisis of widening inequality and declining inclusion, even in the most advanced countries. Those crises are all fundamentally about the fact that we manage what we measure, and what we are measuring is the wrong things. Our societies have become too dominated as simply being engines of economic growth, not engines of the real well-being of citizens. And that was the fundamental idea that drove the creation of the Social Progress Index, to create a measure of the real lived experience of citizens to compare with GDP. And this is where Social Progress Index differs from all the other well-being indices out there. It includes no economic indicators. It's using only social and environmental measures to try and measure the real lived experience of citizens and ask, does every citizen live in a good society? That's the fundamental idea behind the Social Progress Index. Sometimes when I talk about this, and when I talk about a Social Progress Index, especially in America, when I use the word social, people think that we are anti-business or anti-economy. Far from it. I always use this slide here to prove this point, that our chief advisor is Michael Porter of Harvard Business School, a professor at a business school, a world guru on business strategy, economic competitiveness, a registered Republican, a red in tooth and claw capitalist. But Michael Porter, in all his work on business and competitiveness over 30 years, has reached the same conclusion, that we cannot measure and manage the success of our societies simply in terms of the economic. We cannot assume that economic growth always leads to better lives. We have to measure social progress directly so that we can manage social progress directly. That is the fundamental idea behind the Social Progress Imperative. So what is the Social Progress Index? Well, it's a composite index that builds together a whole set of different aspects of what makes a good society. You'll see here in the model, it's based on 3 dimensions. I like to think of it as 3 questions. First of all, does your society give every citizen the basic needs of survival? Food, water, shelter, safety. Secondly, does your society give every citizen the building blocks of a better life? Education, information, health, and a good quality environment. And finally, does your society give every citizen the opportunity to pursue their hopes and dreams with rights, freedom of choice, freedom from discrimination, and access to the world's most advanced knowledge? These, to us, are the fundamental characteristics of what makes a good society. It's based on extensive literature, it's based on extensive consultation, and critically, this definition of social progress is very much aligned with the new UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals and the Social Progress Index are fundamentally aligned around the kind of society we're trying to build, particularly towards the target of 2030. So Social Progress Index uses 50 different indicators to measure all these different aspects of what makes a good society. We've been able to measure 128 countries with complete data, 61 countries with partial data. So what we have is a pretty good perspective on how our world is doing. So what I want to show you first is our results for our 2017 index for the world as a whole. And what we see here is, what we've done is we've just broken down the world score into the 12 components. And the first thing I want you to notice is that social progress is uneven. There are some things we're doing much better at than others. So the highest scores we see here are in things like nutrition and basic medical care, access to basic knowledge. I think it's no surprise that these are issues that were part of the Millennium Development Goals. These are fixable problems where the world has focused attention and where we've made a lot of progress. But on the other hand, there are other issues where we're making much less progress. The worst performing components are things like personal rights. Well, we can understand that. Some countries have chosen a development path that doesn't respect personal rights very much. We also see that tolerance and inclusion is a big problem. But we know that countries at all levels of income, rich and poor alike, are struggling with issues of tolerance and inclusion. So that's why we see this very different pattern around these different challenges. Some of these problems, we know the solutions, and the challenge is to scale the solution. In other areas, we haven't yet figured out the solution, and we need innovation to find the solution. The second thing I'd like to draw your attention to on this slide is that this is the 2017 data, but we started the Global Index in 2014 with full data. And since 2014, we have seen significant progress on social progress globally. And I think this is a really important point to emphasize. We can be so pessimistic about the world. We can watch the news and see problems all the time. But actually we see the world is moving forward. Not every country, not every area, but generally there is progress. As Galileo Galilei said, but it moves. Progress is possible. We've got to be optimists. We've got to believe that we can change things, and we see that progress is possible. So here's the results for the world. How about the different countries? Well, for the 2017 index, here's our top tier of countries. And the best performing countries are Denmark, and Finland, and Iceland, and Sweden. The kind of countries you'd expect to see at the top of a social progress ranking. If they weren't at the top, there would be something wrong with our index. I think what really strikes me if you look at this top group of countries with very high social progress though, is it's not just Scandinavian and Nordic countries. You've got Canada, the UK, Netherlands, Australia, Ireland, other countries that are also experiencing very high social progress. Yes, it may help to be Nordic to have high social progress, but there are other ways to get to that level. If you look at the next category of high social progress, this is one of our most striking findings. The United States is in this second category. The United States is a second-tier country in terms of social progress, including some other G7 countries such as France and Italy. But what we also see here is that we see a number of upper middle income countries coming into this category of high social progress, and Latin American countries. We have Chile, Uruguay, Costa Rica and Argentina that are achieving the high level of social progress, this second tier. And then the next tier down, with upper middle social progress, is where we find most Latin American countries. And it's here, in 60th place, we will find Paraguay. So Paraguay is in the upper middle social progress category, along with most Latin American countries. There are a few lagging behind. If we look at the lower part of the table, we've got Nicaragua through to Honduras in the lower middle social progress category. They're lagging a bit. And then the low and very low social progress countries, very much dominated by sub-Saharan Africa, and also a number of countries with significant governance problems. So this is our ranking of countries. But one of the things we can do with the Social Progress Index is not just look at performance in absolute terms. We can say, how is performance relative to GDP per capita? Because we have no GDP in the model, we can say, what's the performance, what's the relationship between social progress and GDP? And that's what we see on this chart here. We see that, yes, in general, there is higher social progress for richer countries, but it's not the whole story. We can see that GDP is an engine of social progress, but it's not the only part of a plan. And that's why, as Paraguay has done, if you're a country thinking about its development, you can't have a national development plan that's just about economics. You've got to integrate social progress into your national plan. And if we look at how Paraguay is doing, we see it's actually doing slightly, oh dear, this is jumping around. Excuse me. Now, so unfortunately we have a PowerPoint gremlin, and there should be a regression line on this chart. And what that would show is that Paraguay is slightly above the regression line, which shows the average relationship between GDP and social progress. So that's a good story for Paraguay. Okay. So some good news for Paraguay is doing better than many of its peer countries at turning GDP into social progress. What we would also see here is that the regression line, the curve, will be starting to flatten out. And that tells us something very important, which is that Paraguay is at a key inflection point. Because this is a point where countries like Paraguay have succeeded in getting some of the easier wins of social progress, and is now not taking on more difficult challenges. So let's now have a look at Paraguay's performance in some more detail. And we do that using our Social Progress Scorecard. And so I'm going to, before I show you Paraguay, I'm going to give you an illustration of a Social Progress Scorecard using the example of the United States.
Les voy a mostrar un ejemplo usando una tarjeta que se usa para medir el progreso y les va a dar un ejemplo de Estados Unidos.
So what you see at the top left-hand corner of the screen is that the United States has a red circle. Now on this scorecard, red is bad, yellow is okay, blue is good. So there's a lot of red here, which tells us something very worrying about the United States.
Ven arriba que hay un circulito rojo. Rojo significa que está muy mal. Okay. El amarillo es más o menos y el verde está bien. Pero me dijo verde, disculpen. Bueno, es azul.
So what we see here is that actually the United States, since we started the index in 2014, every year has had a red mark. It's underperforming in turning its GDP into social progress.
Desde que comenzó el estudio en 2016 vemos que Estados Unidos siempre está en rojo, entonces tiene un muy bajo nivel de desempeño.
It's the only major industrial economy that performs in this way. The US is a real social progress failure.
Es el único mercado desarrollado que tiene este desempeño. Estados Unidos tiene un problema grande en la parte social.
And what this scorecard does is it shows how the US performs against 15 other countries of similar GDP per capita. So like in boxing, we're comparing the US, an economic heavyweight, with other heavyweights.
Lo que podemos ver es cuál es el desempeño de Estados Unidos en comparación con otros 15 países similares. Es como la comparación del peso pesado en el boxeo.
So where is the US doing badly? It's very clear. It's things like safety. It's things like access to information communications. It's things like health, as we heard earlier. America spends the most in the world as a percentage of GDP on healthcare, but only performs as well as Turkey in terms of outcomes. America is also failing on environmental quality, personal freedom and choice, tolerance and inclusion. If we want to see an explanation of what some of the problems that are driving the political phenomena in the United States, I think we see it in this scorecard. But this is just an illustration. How's Paraguay doing? Well, I'm glad to say a lot better. Here's Paraguay's scorecard. And here we see a lot of yellow. So that's saying, in general, Paraguay is doing about as well as you'd expect for a country of this GDP per capita. That's okay, yeah? Not spectacularly overperforming, but not underperforming either, in general. What we do see is a couple of areas of particular strength and weakness. The strength first is tolerance and inclusion. So we saw in the global results that tolerance and inclusion is a really hard problem. Paraguay seems to be doing very well here. I'd love to hear from you later about what you think that is. Why is Paraguay doing so well on this difficult aspect of social progress? But that for me is a very interesting result. Where we see a weakness though is in the area of shelter, and that seems to be driven by affordable housing and electricity. Now what I wonder is whether or not the story here is actually two stories. Is there a story about the cost of housing in Asunción and the more richer parts of the country, and a separate story about electrification in more rural parts of the country? And so that's one of the things that hopefully as we go down to the departmental level, we can start to tease out what the real story that's going on here. Maybe at some of the indicators there's a few warning lights around safety, around education, but that are worth looking at as well. There may be warnings. But that's the social progress scorecard for Paraguay as a whole. Doing okay, but some areas for improvement, and hopefully some rapid improvement under the leadership of this group. So here's the Social Progress Index results. But we didn't start this because we wanted to create an index. The Social Progress Imperative started in order to use an index to drive action and impact. And that's very much our mission. From index to action to impact. And I have to give a mention here to the important new initiative, the Platform for Innovation with Purpose, that Avina and other partners are working on. Social Progress Imperative is proud to be a part of that initiative, and there are people here today who can tell you more about that if you'd like to learn more. The opportunity for using Social Progress Index to drive progress is twofold. One is, how can it support your organisation? How can this data support your organisation to identify where there are needs, to direct your actions, your investments? It's a practical tool to help identify where are the problems, where you should be responding. Secondly, it's a practical tool for collaboration. It's a way to bring different actors together around a common language of data. One of the biggest problems we have in the social sector is often that you have different sectoral groups, education, health, rights, environment, and they've all got different interests. What social progress indexes can bring those groups together with a common language, crossing the boundaries between government, business and civil society to really collaborate for purpose and for impact. Well, it's jumped ahead. I'm going to give you two examples of how the Social Progress Index is already being used. One is in Europe, where we're collaborating with the European Commission. So the European Commission has a key strategy, which is to bring cohesion across the Union. So this is regional policy to bring the regions of the European Union together. And this is strongly linked to some of the decentralization and subsidiarity agenda in Europe. So the European Commission has actually adopted Social Progress Index and is now using this data to shape its whole cohesion strategy. And I'm proud to say that today they'll be launching their cohesion report for the next 3 years, which will be setting out that strategy using SPI data. So we've got major organisations like SPI using this data to influence investment strategies and for tracking social impact over time. Critically, we're also partnering with business. We're very proud to have a global partnership with Deloitte. Deloitte have been on the team since 2013. And Deloitte really sees how it's so important that business has to be socially useful. It has to be, business can only thrive in a thriving society. And so Deloitte has been a great partner globally and here in Paraguay. And we're also working with a range of other businesses, with Cargill, with Coca-Cola, Natura, and Macisa, are 3 companies that are working in Latin America using the Social Progress Index as a local tool to measure social progress in communities, to help to understand how they can maximise their social impact and how they can collaborate with others. And we'd love to tell you more about these case studies if you're interested. We're also collaborating with a US investment firm called Breckenridge Capital, and they're very excited about developing with us the Social Progress Index data for the United States to influence their municipal bond fund. Their perspective is that actually Social Progress Index data is very important economic data for any investor. And I think that's a very important step forward if you're thinking of social progress data as being an important variable for economic decision making. So those are just some of the applications of the index and how it's actually being used to drive impact around the world. What I want to leave you with is, we're really excited about the innovation that's already taking place in Paraguay, the innovation that is yet to come. Because it's all ultimately about how can we collaborate more, how can we drive action, how can we share what works, how can we share the results, create the conversation about social progress, how can we create better measures, how can we work together to drive and build the societies that we really, really want. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.